Welcome to Zoom Tuesdays at the Capitol, the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance, and its great citizen advocates gather every Tuesday on Zoom at 10 a.m. If you'd like to become part of this group, please send me an email, and I'll be happy to add you to our group. It is Tuesday, March 30th, week 13 of the legislative process, and it's a pretty quick update today because the legislature is on its break, its spring break. Typically, the legislature takes a week around Easter off, kind of take a break between all the work it's doing on policies, and then as it focuses and turns its attention to the state budget. They will be back in session a week from today, next Tuesday. And the next deadline for legislative activity is what's commonly called the third deadline, or the finance deadline, is coming up next Friday, April 9th. And so we saw the policy deadlines come and go over the last couple of weeks. And those are deadlines that require policy bills to be heard.
They can get that way.
And I hear some noise, if we could quiet that down. And the next deadline is coming up on the finance bills. And so what you guys can expect, even though they're on break this week, there are no legislative meetings this week. There are no floor sessions, no formal activity, but you can bet that these finance committees are working behind the scenes. Are working behind the scenes to assemble their omnibus bills.
We do need a cover for the fridge that they did not put on there.
I'm going to have to mute Joy. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that, Joy. So let me focus on what's coming up next. Okay, so these finance committees right now, they're not in session, but the chairs are working on getting their finance bills together. So I want to talk about a couple of things here. I want to talk about omnibus finance bills and fiscal notes. And I know when you got up this morning, that was what you were dying to learn about, is omnibus finance bills and fiscal notes. So here you are, you've come to the right place. So what omnibus finance bills are the giant bills. Omnibus means big, and it's an assembly of all the bills that they've been hearing that spend money. And each committee in the legislature, the Transportation Committee, the Education Committee, the Higher Education Committee, the Healthcare Committee, the Human Services Committees, all of these committees begin assembling omnibus finance bills that make up the state budget. And all the math at the end of the day has to work out. The state has to balance its budget, regardless of how many programs they want to fund. They only have so much money to fund them. And that's based on how much money the state takes in, and that's related to the tax bill. So there's all this math that's going on right now as people are working towards assembling the state budget. And these bills have to come out of the final committees by next Friday, April 9th. So there's not a lot of time left to get these bills put together, and we have not seen any of these bills yet. We're anticipating beginning to see some of these bills as early as today, maybe tomorrow. Some of them we might not even see until early next week. And so what you need to know about these finance bills, about these omnibus bills, is that's what makes up the state budget. So if you have something that spends money and it costs money, and you want the state to spend that money and to put it in the state budget, it has to be in one of these finance bills. And so the two bills that we're most, well, there's three bills, but the ones we're most interested in, of course, the one we're most interested in is the Health and Human Services omnibus finance bills, because that's where the vast majority of funding for programs that affect people with brain injury is located. And I'll give you guys a report as soon as I see that bill and we see if there are what's in it. That's where things like the fix for the Medicaid spend down is. That's where you guys heard about the PCA driving bill. That's where rates are set for how much personal care attendants get paid. There's a lot of important bill policies and spending that go on in that bill. Cassie's law is currently in the Judiciary Committee in the House. And in the Senate, it's alive, but it hasn't gotten any money yet. And so we need to see that comes in there. So what they'll do is, you'll hear the term a delete all amendment. And essentially all they're doing is you guys have heard all along in the committees, right? They keep saying, we're going to lay this bill over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Essentially what that means is they're stacking all these ideas up. All these bills are on the table, quote unquote, for possible inclusion. And possible, it just means that possible. There is not enough money to fund every bill that's sitting there for possible inclusion. And so they are going to pick and choose which ones of those bills they're going to fund. And they're going to do that through the process of creating a delete all amendment. That delete all amendment will ultimately become the omnibus finance bill for that committee. So as we see these amendments, as we see these bills come forward, we'll know what the base is and what they decided to fund. Then that bill will go through the process of amendments in committee, amendments on the floor, fights on the floor, hours and hours of all the fun you could possibly imagine watching on TV or the computer of the legislative process. And Brooklyn told me I can't compare it to 2-year-olds anymore because it gives 2-year-olds a bad name. So I'm not going to do that. So, but at any rate, I joke a little bit. Sometimes it is frustrating watching this process. So those are the omnibus finance bills. The other thing and so watch those. I could go on and on about the process and how they're built and what's an amendment and what's germane, what's not germane, how it balances, how it doesn't balance, all the rules. We can talk about that if you guys would like in a future or a future Zoom, or you can ask me questions when we're done here with the update. But it's all based on math, right? Because as I said, the budget has to balance, and that math is the official math for that is what's called fiscal notes. So every bill that spends money has to have an official fiscal note, and that fiscal note is where the legislate is the official word on how much that bill will cost. And so as they're stacking up these bills for possible inclusion, they're also receiving fiscal notes for these bills so that they know how much those bills cost. And then they have to do the math and try to figure out what they want to spend, how much they want to spend. Do they want to fund all of it? Do they want to fund part of it? Do they want to cut something else? It's all math. It's all done. It's all based on these fiscal notes. And unfortunately, or I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but fiscal notes are an inherently political process because they're based on assumptions. You have to say this is what we think it's going to cost. Nobody knows for sure, and it only looks out for 2 years. So you could have the best bill in the world that could save a ton of money 10 years from now, but that doesn't show up anywhere, and all it looks like is an expensive bill. So that's one of the struggles that we often have with fiscal notes. And hopefully there'll be a reform someday where we can start to count long-term savings in these fiscal notes. But until we get to that point, we have to deal with what's in front of us. And so when you hear me talk about omnibus finance bills, when you hear me talk about fiscal notes, when you hear me talk about we're still waiting for the fiscal note, or the bill's on the table for possible inclusion, or it's not in the delete all amendment, it's in the delete all amendment. That's all the math, and that's all the assembling of these budget bills, okay? And this is going on right now as we speak, mostly behind closed doors, in the hands of very few people, which is not an inclusive process, you guys. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Very few people are actually making these decisions right now, but eventually those bills have to come out in the light of day for the public to see, and we will get a look at them, and we will be able to see what they chose to fund, how much they chose to fund it. Did they fund Cassie's Law? Did they not fund Cassie's Law? What are we going to do? Can we try to get that put back in? Who are we going to cut if we want to try to put that back in? Are we going to raise taxes, or are we not going to raise taxes? And this is happening in the Senate, and this is happening in the House, and the governor's weighing in. So it's getting very complicated very fast, but I just want you guys to know that's what's going on. So there's not anything going on publicly this week. They're on break, but I can tell you those back rooms are full of staff, full of people, legislators, full of finance chairs working hard on putting these bills together. And as soon as we see them, then we'll know if what we're trying to get passed is going to get any money or not. So it's good when you know your bill is alive at this point, but just because your bill is alive doesn't mean that it's going to get funded. So that's where we are, and that's what's happening with that. So legislature's on break, just means they're doing everything behind closed doors, and there's no public hearings this week. That third deadline is when all of these omnibus finance bills have to clear all of their policy committees, is Friday the 9th. Guys, that's not a very long time. Very much time. They're coming back on Tuesday, then they go till 4 days. They have 4 days to put all these bills together. So it's going to be kind of a busy, tough couple of weeks. So that's what's happening. As soon as we see fiscal notes, as soon as we see delete all amendments, as soon as we see bills, I will give you guys a quick update on what's going on. We'll have plenty to talk about next Tuesday. So with that, that's the update for the week. I'm going to pause the recording.